Hi, I'm Brett from papercartridges.com. It's about 4 p.m. on July 2nd, 2023, and exactly right now, 160 years ago, the Battle of Gettysburg is raging about 4 miles from where I'm standing. But obviously, I am not on the Gettysburg battlefield. I'm here in the village of Hunterstown, and this is Hunterstown Road. And this was the site of a skirmish that began right now, 4 p.m., 160 years ago, that would not only change the course of the Battle of Gettysburg, but may indirectly have saved the entire Army of the Potomac. And just a quick admin note before we start. I do live here in Hunterstown, and while I do encourage you to come visit this forgotten Civil War battlefield, keep in mind this area is predominantly private property, and I have obtained permission from my neighbors to film on their property. But don't let that stop you from coming and checking out one of the forgotten corners of the Gettysburg battlefield. Earlier in the day on July 2nd, the exhausted cavalry of Confederate General Jeb Stuart passed right through Hunterstown. Stuart was on his way to his famous meeting with Lee.
There is no time.
And he's also hauling hundreds of wagons of supplies, which he had plundered during his ride through the breadbasket of Pennsylvania. And from the porch right here at the McCreary house, Jesse and Jane McCreary and their 4 children watched the Confederate column passing by their house. And they could hear in the distance the artillery fire and maybe even some rattle of musketry from the fighting taking place in Gettysburg. But everything was peaceful in Hunterstown, at least so far. So Hunterstown Road behind me is one of the few roads that would lead into Gettysburg, directly into the rear of General Lee's army. And General Stuart was tasked with preventing Federal forces from getting around the Confederate lines, especially into the rear. And Stuart ordered Wade Hampton to post detachments of cavalry here in Hunterstown as an advance guard in case the Federals tried to get around and attack the rear of Lee's army, where they could cause enormous disruption if they did get in there. And in fact, that is exactly what the Federal cavalry were attempting to do. 2 brigades of Federal cavalry under General Kilpatrick were in fact in this area, and they were looking for the flank of Lee's army. And around 4 in the afternoon on July 2nd, 1863, they came down this road in the direction behind me, and they ran into Company C of Cobb's Legion that had been posted by Wade Hampton to defend Hunterstown and sound the alarm if any Federal forces tried to approach the rear of Lee's lines from this direction. After Cobb's Legion sounded the alarm, more Federal cavalry came down Hunterstown Road, including 1 3-inch ordnance rifle from the 2nd United States Artillery Battery M, Pennington's battery, and they dismounted right here in front of the McCreary house. And we know that 14-year-old Martha McCreary crawled out as shots and shell were flying down Hunterstown Road, and she peered out through this window, over this windowsill, and watched the Federal gunners load and fire. Now, Martha McCreary would go on to marry David Plank, and their son, Eddie Plank, better known as Gettysburg Eddie, would become one of the first all-time greats in baseball, and he's got several pitching records that still stand unbroken today. But his mother, as a 14-year-old girl, watched the unfolding skirmish at Hunterstown from this window. So outnumbered and outgunned, the Confederates fell back through Hunterstown. I'm here at the Tate Farm, which is on what's left of the square in the center of town, and I'm walking down what was the original Hunterstown Road. And the Confederates fell back from the town, and they headed in this direction. I'm walking towards a high ridge, and they would regroup on the other side. So hotly pursued by Kilpatrick's cavalry, the Confederates fell back here across Beaver Dam Creek, and they headed up towards the ridge behind me. Once they got across the ridge, they had some cover, but as evidence of the exceptionally violent afternoon 160 years ago exactly to this day, they're still digging up evidence of the fighting here in the form, in this case, of a reed parrot shell here on the Tate Farm. The tree line you're looking at behind me, along the ridge behind the Tate Farm, was where 23-year-old Brigadier General George Armstrong Custer, one of Kilpatrick's 2 brigade commanders, was gathering up his brigade of Michigan cavalry, the Michigan Wolverines. And it's a little unclear what happened next, but what we do know is that this was the first time that Custer achieved a victory while he was actually in command of the troops. By this point, he had been in lots of battles, he had lots of combat experience, but he wasn't the commander. So driving out the small number of Wade Hampton's Rebs from Hunterstown was his first taste of victory, being the guy in charge. So the Confederates are on the run, and the boy general went up to the 6th Michigan Cavalry, Company A, possibly because they were the first in line just on the ridge behind me, or also possibly because they're the only Union unit at the entire Battle of Gettysburg armed with the modern Spencer repeating rifle. But Custer went up to them, personally took command, shouted, "Come on, boys, I'll lead you this time," and he led a charge over the top of this ridge down towards the Confederates, who he thought were falling back on the other side. General Custer led his first cavalry charge down the ridge behind me along the Hunterstown Road. It was his first cavalry charge as a general, and it was also an absolute disaster. He faced serious Confederate resistance, and Custer himself was actually shot off of his horse right about where I am standing right now, near the Felty farm. It's possible Custer might have been killed or captured right here on July 2nd, 1863, if it wasn't for another Michigan trooper, a Private Churchill, who raced down, cut Custer out from a bunch of Rebs who were trying to take him prisoner, pulled him up on his horse, and galloped back towards the ridge to safety. After Custer's failed charge, both sides withdrew. The Federals fell back behind the Tate Farm Ridge, and the Confederates took up positions at the Gilbert Farm on the ridge behind me. And they both carried out some exchange of artillery fire with a few guns until after nightfall. And that was it. The Battle of Hunterstown was over. But a few miles away, a few miles behind me, was General Ewell at his headquarters, and he had heard the fire here, and his reaction to the small skirmish at Hunterstown would have far greater implications for the rest of the Battle of Gettysburg and possibly even the American Civil War. The Battle of Hunterstown was very small compared to the other engagements here at Gettysburg. There were only about 100 casualties at Hunterstown. But this small engagement had unintended and very far-reaching consequences, because the sound of the fighting here, the artillery at around 4:30 in the afternoon, in the rear of the Confederate lines, General Ewell could hear it from his headquarters, and this unnerved an already nervous and eccentric Ewell, who is already late, taking way too much time in carrying out Lee's order to attack Culp's Hill. And Wade Hampton's cavalry had been posted on the Hanover Road to keep General Gregg's Union cavalry away from Ewell's rear. And when the Battle of Hunterstown starts, Wade Hampton's cavalry is redirected up here to Hunterstown, leaving the road open for those Federal cavalry. And Ewell has to scramble to find infantry out of his corps to post on that road to keep Gregg's Federal cavalry away. And the infantry that end up getting tasked with babysitting Gregg's cavalry are none other than the legendary Stonewall Brigade, which are probably the best 3,000 troops in the entire Army of Northern Virginia. And so the Stonewall Brigade sits out the fighting on July 2nd, just keeping an eye on the Federal cavalry in the distance. And you probably already know that Ewell's assault on Culp's Hill late on July 2nd, 1863, did not succeed, even though it came very, very close. The Union defenses held out by a thread. And I think it is safe to say, if we dip our toe into counterfactual history, that if Ewell had been able to commit the Stonewall Brigade with the rest of his assault, the Union line on Culp's Hill would have been overwhelmed. The Federal right would have collapsed. And if Culp's Hill falls, the rest of the Federal line at Gettysburg is completely untenable. And Meade, almost certainly in the evening or the early night of July 2nd or early July 3rd, probably would have been forced to withdraw during the night because his position has been turned. And Robert E. Lee could have had his costly but still achieved his victory on northern soil over the Army of the Potomac. And of course, that could have had far reaching political implications for the rest of the American Civil War. So little Martha McCreary, as she was peering out over this windowsill, watching the battle unfold on Hunterstown Road in front of her house, would have had no idea that she was watching what could be described as one of the most critical events in American military history. Because here, the little skirmish in Hunterstown sets in motion a chain of events that leads to Hampton's cavalry being sent up into Hunterstown, General Ewell being forced to divert infantry out of his assault on Culp's Hill. The assault on Culp's Hill fails, and who knows what might have transpired if it wasn't for what happened here exactly 160 years ago, almost literally to the minute. If you do want to visit the Hunterstown battlefield, I recommend that you don't wait because unfortunately, the land near the Felty Farm, where Custer led his charge through, has been purchased by private developers, and in the next few years, it will be turned into the Amblebrook Retirement Home, a 2,500 unit housing development. And that field will be gone. It will not exist probably in just a couple of years. So if you do want to see the pristine original battlefield that General Custer's first charge took place on, and this pivotal moment that may have changed the Battle of Gettysburg, may have saved the Army of the Potomac, may have changed the outcome of the American Civil War. If you want to see where that happened on the original ground, you should come up here before it's too late. But I'm Brett Gibbons from papercartridges.com, here at home in beautiful Hunterstown, Pennsylvania. I hope this was useful to you. I'll see you next time.